Welcome to latest Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. Rob Staten, Adam Nathan here. The Brits getting together to talk about the big news today, which is that DK Metcalf has requested a trade. And there's been very little sort of follow-up news from that. There's not been any like lists of teams being named. Really, the charge has been touted as a possibility, but I kind of wondered if this would be a fast-moving thing. Like the trade request comes in, it's facilitated, the bids come in, and maybe by tomorrow we hear where he's going. I'm not sure about that now. So here we are. Seahawks are facing a big week. We'll talk about that. But Adam, what's your initial reaction to what's been a very newsy day today?
Firstly, I'm rattled by the new StreamYard music to introduce the show. I mean, it's taken me completely by surprise. It's rattled me. But
see, that has been a big talking point, by the way.
I bet
all the way through the combine, people were commenting on that more than.
But I don't think you don't feel it until like you're in the show and you're waiting for the which I used to love. Got me right up for it. And
I don't like this new music.
It's too calm. It's too calm. I think you can't have that after a 21-17 loss home to Carolina, can you? To set you up for a live rant. But anyway,
it doesn't get you going for a rant. That's a good point.
You can't do it.
It needs to change back.
Yeah, someone speak to Mr. StreamYard. But yeah, what a day, huh? I was just like driving around and saw the thing, and Twitter has unfortunately become the place where you see a tweet of that magnitude and you immediately think, well, that's fake. So I was checking for like Tom Pell 155 aero when I saw it on the thing and thought, well, that's, and then all of a sudden, like, it's real. I don't know. Like, I feel like if I was asked to do it as a high school debate, I would happily take both sides of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing for Seattle. I think there are a lot of ways where you can easily find the positives of we can use the money for this and we can get this, these picks back for that. But ultimately, I never think it's a good thing when your star players want to leave. And I think, ultimately we have to look at it like there's a trade request from maybe your best player. Why has that happened? And I don't think you could ever dress that up as a healthy thing for the franchise to have. And also, it's just one of the 3 or 4 players that you would say like is a blue chip talent is not going to be here. And they are always harder to replace than just, get one out, get one in. Like how many we drafted in the last 5 to even 10 years, maybe 3 or 4 maximum. So these guys don't grow on trees. But equally, you could say, do you want to give a guy who for probably 6 or 7 off seasons in a row, we go into it thinking, be nice to get a bit more out of DK Metcalf next year, wouldn't it? And what can we do to unlock DK? Now, he's been the main constant. So at some point you have to think how much of that is on him. Do you want to give a guy a 3rd contract? So I think you can easily take the other side of it. And I'm sure we will go into both sides in great detail. Everyone else is. But yeah, I find it one of those. I think overall I'm sad by the whole thing. But obviously there are positives and benefits that can come from it going forward.
I've been trying to work out what might have provoked this, because in pretty much every discussion we've had about DK Metcalf in the last however many months, the conclusion has always been, and then I expect them to pay him and keep him, that the frameworks of the Brandon Ayuk contract would enable them to lower his cap hit quite easily and keep him on a reasonable deal. And they constantly talked him up and spoke positively about him. There was never any real whiff of any likely parting there. And then we have this. So something has to have changed. And I think the 3 things that I've come to terms with that might be the reason why, Adam, and I wonder if any of these are the answer in your opinion, or whether you think there's anything else. I think either they were talking trades at the combine, as was speculated, and he has seen all of that and has decided, if you're going to talk trades, I'll just slap a trade request in. And that's what's provoked this. Maybe contract talks have stalled and the Seahawks are saying, we'll give you this. And he's saying, no, I want a fair bit more than that. And he just doesn't see any route to getting the kind of deal that he's after. So he thinks, if I'm not going to earn as much, I want to go somewhere where I can win. Or the team and the player have just soured on each other. That tends to happen sometimes. It could be that maybe the team thinks, yeah, I'm not sure whether we want to pay this guy an absolute fortune. And then maybe the player thinks, yeah, you know what? I've been here a long time. We're not getting any closer. I want to give it a go somewhere else. And maybe the team and the player have soured on each other. That's what I think it has to be down to. What do you think?
Yeah. Again, it's a bit of a cop-out answer by saying there's obviously, I think all of those things probably ring true. I can't believe that if the Seahawks and DK could come to a financial agreement that they couldn't have just got a deal done. So I think overall, I wonder if there has just been an impasse when it comes to the money. Because like, why wouldn't that have just got a deal done if that was the case? I mean, I don't think there are rumbling. You would think that if you'd heard that Metcalf was so unhappy that something would have, bled out, at any point, but there hasn't been any of that. And I've heard a little bit that I've not been too impressed with today. Some people saying, well, DK's character and he wasn't all in on the team and he didn't feel like, he was had complete buy-in from McDonald. I think that's people being wise after the fact. And I think that's pretty unfair. Yes, the odd penalty, which was annoying for 15 yards, but I never got the impression that he wasn't a pretty good team member and team guy. But yeah, it's just weird. But then ironically, when I think about the money thing, there was this just understanding that, well, yeah, they'll just pay him at some point. And there was a bit of me that had that feeling of, with the Dolphins a couple of years ago, yeah, well, we better just pay Tua, because what else is going to happen if we don't? Like, what if we don't do it? Where are we going to be then? And I did sort of feel at times with Metcalf that they were paying him out of obligation and because we don't know what we're going to do without him, as opposed to because we really want to pay him. So I do think there are benefits that can come from this, whereby if we're forced into a situation where he does leave, and this isn't a leverage play, which I think we both agree it isn't, it does give you kind of a jump start to like see what you're doing quicker. And they're now forced to make a decision. They're forced to move on with the franchise, whereby they could have kicked this can down the road for a year or two, sign into a big contract, and maybe they're rejected. And then you think, well, why did we do that? We should have just traded him there and then. Well, now you're going to. You got the chance. So I feel like you can take as many positives as you can take negatives out of the whole situation. And it's now the obligation of Schneider to turn potential negatives into positives, which that's what he's paid to do.
The key question is, how much can you actually get for him? That's going to be the big factor. It's going to be very interesting to see, because I'm assuming at this point that he's going to be dealt, and potentially dealt before the league year opens or shortly after. And a year ago, if they'd have tried to trade him, you'd be looking at a situation where in the top 10 of the draft, you have got Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Roma Dunze. And then other receivers off the back of that. It was quite a deep receiver draft last year. This year, you have players who are expected to go potentially in the first round. Ted McMillan, Luther Burden, Golden at Texas, Amika Ibuka, who's a big Seahawks fan from Tacoma. You've got players like that who could go in the first round, but you haven't got a Malik Neighbors. You haven't got a top player who, Marvin Harrison Jr., who everybody expects to go on and be a top number one NFL receiver, and it's almost like a given. So will that push some teams to come in and say, well, we'll take DK Metcalf, whether that is a good contending team or semi-contending team like the Packers or the Steelers, or a legit contender like a Buffalo or a Kansas City to come in and make a move, or some of the teams at the top end of round two. New England, reportedly, according to Matt Bowen, did a very interesting combine rumors piece on NBC Sports, talking about how the Patriots are really keen to make a splash to get Drake May a number one receiver. Is it a team like that? A lot of people are saying the Raiders, because Pete Carroll's there. They don't have a top receiver in Vegas. So There are definitely teams in there, Adam, but then there's a whole bunch of people on Twitter saying, yeah, what Deebo Samuel only got a 5th round pick. Now, I think the situations are very different. Deebo Samuel looks like a player who's almost done, whereas the situation in Metcalf is he's 27, he's a couple of years younger, and I think you've got 3 or 4 really good, he could help a team legitimately like the Packers get over the top or take a step further, which would justify that trade. He could help the Bills win a title. If he went to the Bills and they won the Super Bowl next year, which is not beyond the realms of possibility, it would be a fantastic trade for the Bills. So I do think it's a very different situation to Deebo Samuel, which feels like a bit of a shot to nothing with the ex front office member of staff who's now the GM in Washington giving it a go. And Jaden Daniels is very cheap, so they can justify it. So I think it's very different. But is the difference 4 rounds, I suppose, is what I'm saying, Adam? Is the difference a 1st round pick versus a throwaway 5th? Are the Seahawks going to have to accept a 2nd round pick for DK Metcalf? Are they going to get teams playing low ball with them and saying, well, we only want to give you a 2nd? And how long do the Seahawks allow that 2nd to just linger in the ether before they take it versus sort of holding on for a 1st? Like, are they prepared to take this all the way through to the draft, to like a week before the draft, in order to get what they want? When Frank Clark was traded, there was a report from Jay Glazer at this time in the year saying, just keep an eye on Frank Clark might be dealt. And I can remember, you'll know what this is, but our American viewers will not. My wife had dragged me to Crufts, and which is the famous dog show that we have over here in England. And while there was a particularly tedious thing going on that I was watching, I wrote a blog post about Jay Glazer saying Frank Clark is going to potentially be traded on my phone. And it's very hard to write an article on a phone because it's so fiddly. But I wrote it out there, and then the trade didn't happen until about a week before the draft. So is that going to happen again? Are the Seahawks going to take this all the way through to April? Are we going to have a boring saga that goes on forever, all the way through to April, while the Seahawks try and get exactly what they want? Or is that offer going to be forthcoming soon? These are all the things that I'm thinking of here, Adam. I hope it gets done ASAP and they get a good offer and accept it. But what's the best kind of offer they can expect, and when's it going to happen? They're the big questions.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to someone about the potential of the Raiders, for example, but that the 6th overall pick is obviously going to be too rich for anyone's blood. But what they got, 37 or 38 in the 2nd round? I mean, reading some of your draft stuff, is there an enormous amount of difference in the player quality between 23 and 38? I don't know. I don't.
The answer is no.
The impression there isn't. So my hunch, and I think it would do everyone the world of good to sort of just always take your first loss. It was a phrase that I've always heard from a business standpoint, and because ultimately it's not often that your 2nd loss offer is better than your 1st one. And I just feel even for a number of reasons, even if the package isn't necessarily the best, I think being able to go into free agency and the whole draft process, which you're sort of in, but let's say post free agency draft, knowing exactly what you need to do, I just don't think that's going to be particularly healthy with this situation lingering over, and it will linger. And it's such a star player. Like Frank Clark was obviously a very popular and famous player in Seattle. I don't get the impression that he'd be the kind of guy that every press conference would be dominated, national media talking, got to talk about Frank Clark, Because also, I think the impression was that you'd almost certainly get a 1st round pick for someone like him, whereas you're not quite sure about DK. And is every press conference with Schneider and his radio show, is it all going to be about DK? And then what happens if they go through the 1st round of the draft and they haven't found a way to deal him? I think a clean break is going to be the healthiest way to go about this. I don't know what you think about that, but I just don't think it's going to be healthy going into free agency and then, the official 30 visits and stuff with this just sort of albatross hanging around them of what we're going to do with this bloke.
Well, that's the big difference between Frank Clark and DK Metcalf. Frank Clark didn't request a trade, and it was not made public. It was just Jay Glazer's sources, which were accurate, saying he could be dealt. And it was one of those things where there weren't many people talking about it. It was kind of like the fringes of Seahawks Twitter and blogs were talking about it. Not even the Seattle media were really sort of picking up on this idea. It was always like a possibility, but it wasn't discussed ad nauseum. This will be a topic on every radio show every day until it's dealt now. This will be the thing that dominates the narrative in Seattle, is what's going to happen with DK Metcalf. And as you quite rightly say, that's not healthy. And then the other thing you've got is this year in particular, it feels really important free agency. And it's not a massive saving to get DK off the book, but it's $10.8 million. Having that $10.8 million now versus having it in 6 weeks' time it could be significant if you want to go and try and get Will Fries, or if you want to go and get Drew Dalman, or both, or if you want to go and get an offensive lineman and then dabble in some of these other positions. If you feel as if we have got to go and get another receiver now, so we're going to have to go and check out what De'Ami Brown's market is, or we're going to have to go and see what Josh Palmer's market is, for example, because we need somebody else in who can actually catch a football. Because at the minute, the Seahawks got JSN and they've got Jake Bobo, and that's pretty much it. And Jake Bobo, with the greatest respect to Jake Bobo, like him, but he's like a fifth receiver type guy. He's an extra on a roster. He's not necessarily somebody who you're going to suddenly promote up to wide receiver 2. And they haven't got that guy who's working in the background to do that. So they could do with having this sorted ASAP, so they can actually plan ahead and use the money. So I agree with you. It needs to be done. And that is the difference, is that it's a trade request. So hopefully that will just move things along. It is going to be interesting to hear from John. I bet John Schneider wishes he wasn't doing that radio show tomorrow, because I'm guessing they're going to ask. I mean, like, maybe they won't ask about it. I kind of
Would
feel
it
like
stun you if they didn't ask? Oh, we forgot to ask about. We'll do it next week, John. We'll do it next week with DK.
I think sometimes you have to just cut to the chase. And tomorrow, I think they've got to come out and go, this is the big news. What's happening? And they can't be saying, so it's a week on from the combine. What are the meetings like this week, John? It can't be that. And it can't also, by the way, and this is, we all respect Tyler Lockett, you can't be starting with, what a great career he had. Like, I'm afraid DK has put paid to all of that now. You've got to cut to the chase. And if it has to be 20, 30 minutes on DK and what happens next, so be it. Like, that's the topic of the day. And until he's traded, and I do think you're right, they've got to move on. But this is it now. Just get on with it. Move on. Get what you can. I wrote on the blog, Adam, that if it was a pick, I'm comfortable with a pick from anywhere from 21 and the Steelers, because the Steelers, there's a lot of Steelers fans who want him, and they're happy to give up 21 for it. Some of them. 21 to about 44 is Dallas. I think that is a range that I'd be comfortable with. I think the lower you go down on that scale, I'd want something else. For example, I'd take 21 straight up, I think, for DK. But if you took 44, I think you'd have to have a third round pick as well. And I'm happy with either of those things. If it's a 2 and a 3 in this class, I'll take that. If it's a 1 on its own, I'll take that. If you can get a Frank Clark type deal, fantastic. And round of applause for John Schneider if he gets that. I'm just not sure if you're going to get a Frank Clark type of deal, which, if I'm right in saying, was like a first and a second the following year. Now, that'd be great, wouldn't it? You know, if they could get a first this year and a second next year, fantastic. Some people have been suggesting a second, a whole bunch. I think Brian maybe suggested this, and then other people have said, what about this? A second this year and a first next year. Yeah, I could live with that. I like the idea of having a pick a bit earlier, one, because I just think that if they want to get into the quarterback market, Adam, I think it might help to have a pick sooner rather than later. I think if you wait till 50 for quarterbacks, you might find that they've all gone. I think we're going to see a rush on that position at some point. And I don't know if they'll last to 50. And then it'll be another, oh, shucks, we missed out again episode. I think if you have a pick a bit earlier than that, you might not miss out. So that could be important if they want to invest finally in a quarterback. But maybe they don't. I don't know. I'm just suggesting sort of suggestions with that. But yeah, I think if I was to sort of say to you, then 21 on its own, or 23 on its own, or a sort of mid to late second and a third in the same range in round 3, would either of those kind of things, would you be okay with that?
I mean, what are you going to do otherwise?
Yeah.
Ultimately.
So what's your reaction going to be if it's like the person just commented now and said, get ready for it just being a third rounder? What would your reaction be if it was just a high third? One of Las Vegas's 2 third-round picks, let's say, or maybe even both.
If it happened this week, I reckon I'd grumble about it and begrudgingly get on with my life.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, I don't want this dragging for a number of reasons. I mean, we should probably just. I don't know when. I think Curtis is watching the show. When do sort of Geno's guarantees start kicking in for next year? Because at some point, do you have to start thinking about what you do with? Do you want to pay good money for a 35-year-old quarterback if, with the best will in the world, I know they always say they want to compete, but at some point, it's just bloody hard to do it if you've not got the horses. Like, at what point do you start having to think about your quarterback decision?
I think they would. And Curtis, if you answer, Curtis is with us. He's said it here, so I'll just put it up now. He said it's March 16th, 17th is 16 million bonuses due. So you have got essentially 11 days with Geno Smith to come to some conclusion with that. I think part of the problem with Geno is I think they would be very prepared to sort of see what else is out there, Adam, if there was anything out there. And I don't think for a second that John Schneider and Mike McDonald want to go down the Aaron Rodgers route. And I don't think they want to go on the Justin Fields route. It kind of just leaves it at Sam Darnold. And I was reading earlier that I think, again, this was Matt Bowen, and I think there was another person who wrote about this as well. They don't really understand what's going on with Sam Darnold. There doesn't seem to actually be that much of a market. In fact, somebody, I can't remember who I was reading, it wasn't a blog, it was a reporter, was suggesting that it wouldn't be amazingly surprising if he ended up without a starting job next year, that his market might just not be that great. Now, if that's the case, then, well, it becomes a bit more interesting. But I think that's what they're worried about, because I think if there was a viable alternative, like essentially a cheaper, younger Geno, I think they would go for it. I'm guessing they don't see Daniel Jones and people like that as that. And they just fear the thought of having a 3-win season and everybody getting fired. And that's how I would answer to that, is if the Seahawks are terrible next year, I think John Schneider could lose his job. And I think he feels as if the base level with Geno Smith is probably 8, 9, 10 wins. And that might be, the idea of trying to get one more win than last season keeps him in a job. 4-win season, lose the job. So I think that's probably what that is. And the reason why they're not going to part with him. But I did wonder that as well. And there is something else on the money side of things I want to talk about. But that was the other thing I thought earlier, Adam, was what does this all mean for Geno Smith? I thought we were going to hear about a compromise deal by now. I thought we'd hear it after the combine because they were talking on Friday. That's what John Schneider said. And here we are Wednesday and it's still not done. Now, it might be that they're hammering it out, the dotting the I's, crossing the T's as we speak. Before the weekend, we hear of a deal. There's not been any suggestion of any negative about this. There's not been any suggestion of any positive steps either. And maybe it's in a very similar situation to the DK thing, Adam. Maybe DK's agents have talked to John Schneider at the combine. They continued those talks. Then they're in a totally different area financially. And they decided it's time to part ways. And maybe we'll find in the next couple of days that Geno Smith's camp have decided we'll have a bit of that as well. We want to part ways. And the Las Vegas Raiders, until they have a quarterback signed, sealed, and delivered, with Pete Carroll as the head coach of that team, you do have to wonder whether there's a chance that they would come in for Geno Smith and take him on and do what he wants to do with the cap space to do it, that the Seahawks won't do. So you do have to wonder a little bit about that. And then if that all unfolds that way, it becomes an absolute circus. And that is, I think there is a little bit of a fear to that. Like this time next week, or maybe by next Friday, we could sit and have a conversation and we could say, they've traded DK, they've got a good haul, they've gone and signed a couple of offensive linemen, maybe done something else that's interesting in free agency as well, that most people go, that's a good signing. And we could say, that's just what they needed. Brilliant. O-line addressed, frees them up for the draft, job's a good one. Or we could be sat here in a week, they're not getting offers for DK, nobody really knows what's going on, or they've traded him for a ham sandwich, they've not done enough on the offensive line, Adam, and all of a sudden Geno Smith's going, I want out. And that would be a serious problem for this team, because then whatever you think of the players involved, it just looks like a mess.
Yeah. Blimey, it really has become an incredible tipping point of a week for the team, hasn't it? Sort of from nowhere as well. Like you had the little flurry of reporting from the combine that I think people thought, well, that doesn't really appear to be much legs to that. I still don't think there was. I think this is a different story entirely to that personally. Others may disagree.
Well, the story last week was that the Packers felt they had a framework for a deal. So if they have got a framework for a deal, I'm guessing we'll see it announced in the next couple of days.
Yeah, for sure. I'd imagine.
Otherwise, that's not true. I mean, if that story was reported accurately, that's what will happen then, surely.
Yeah, and I'm from what I'm led to believe, I'm not reporting, I'm not a reporter, but from speaking to people, that deal doesn't exist, as far as I can tell. Let's see. Let's see what happens with that. But it's not good for Schneider, this. Like, I think he needed a fairly smooth just transition into free agency, into the draft. I feel sorry for Mike McDonald as well, because, he must feel like he was sort of getting his legs underneath him. Good end of the season, if not great. Let's push on. New offensive coordinator. How exciting to get to work with potentially, a freak of a receiver physically, which he undoubtedly is. I can be the guy to get the best out of him. And the worry for me with Kubiak is that there was so much discussion about how it was great when he had all his players, and then it sort of the arse fell out of it when he didn't. Well, day one or day two, you might be losing your best one, so that doesn't feel particularly ideal. But yeah, I mean, look, it does give the franchise the opportunity to just strip things down a little bit and then see what they can do with that. I'm not convinced that they would take that route. I still think they'd go down the, we're always competing and we're trying to win a championship this year and plug some gaps here, which I'm never a big fan of, but let's see. But it's just so hard to even know. Like, normally you've got kind of some clarity in your thinking. You come on a stream and something's happened or a game's happened and you've got thoughts, but I really think you could so easily see it from both sides, and whatever we think, there'll be someone that completely disagrees and sees it the other way entirely. So I'm finding this a really hard one to rationalize and try and come up with something that's, an original thought, because I just don't feel like we've got anywhere near enough, light on the situation yet. And you're right, it's weird that, like, we've just had reports DK wanted a trade. I mean, that's 6 hours ago. And there's been like nothing since then really about this team might be interested. Someone said maybe the Chargers, but not reporting. It almost feels like someone's just thrown their dummy out the pram and just thought, spat the dummy out and just thought, no, not having this, I'm leaving.
It does feel a lot like that. And do you know, I think the problem with it, Adam, is the point you made a second ago is quite interesting, because we would, if it was a trade that had been announced, we'd be talking about the compensation, what happens next. But we're not. We're sort of sat in this world of unknown. What are they going to get? Is he actually going to be traded? When's he going to be traded? What are they going to do in free agency next week? And this could be a week that defines John Schneider's career in Seattle. He will be under so much pressure if he can't get a good deal, or if it just ends up being a horrible distraction, stalemate for weeks and weeks going into the draft. If he doesn't address the offensive line, this is it. Or alternatively, he can get all those things done and people can go, fair play. Now the Seahawks are moving in the right direction. That's why it's such a pivotal week. The more I think about it, I think the more you've got to try and establish what the best offer is out there and just say, come on, let's just stop fanning about and get this done. And we'll see.
Yeah, I think we'd need to be proactive with this, because DK doesn't strike me as the level of player where, like, every GM has dropped their phone and thought, quick, call John Schneider. It wouldn't stun me if, a lot of discussions are happening and they'd be like, yeah, we'll make an offer for DK, test the water, see what happens. And that is the potential of how things could be delayed quite dramatically, because we've tried to go through the list of teams. There doesn't appear to be anyone that would be thinking, get John on the phone right now, because we've got to get a deal done this week. I would imagine that a lot of these teams might even think, let's see what happens in free agency. let's see what happens in the draft. Maybe we'll see if DK we can just sort of falls in our lap. And that is the concern. Like, I feel like Seattle needs to be more proactive than maybe other teams trying to get him.
Possibly. I think there's also the thought, though, that maybe you can play the game a little bit here. Maybe it'd work for the Seahawks to chuck a couple of names out that, if they do get calls, and try and generate a bit of. I can remember once being really young and having a birthday and getting some birthday money, and I could not spend that money quickly enough. Like, if it would just get me to a shop, I'm going to spend this on the first thing that I see. And I can remember exactly what I bought, and it was a waste of money. But there's this, teams are now in this week leading up to free agency period where, let's say you're the Patriots, the thought that maybe somebody like the Bills in your division might get DK Metcalf, one, make it even harder to play them in the future, and two, he will score touchdowns on you, and you think that could be Drake May throwing touchdowns to him. All of a sudden, you think, I don't want to miss out, and I don't want to let them get him. And then they get a bit pushier, and then they want to get this done. And then maybe the Bills react to that, and that you need that. You need a couple of teams at least competing with each other to get his signature. And that is the one thing about DK. Because if he was 30, it'd be hard. But because he's 27, teams go, okay, still at a good age. Look at the guy. Let's put the highlight. Owner puts the highlights on YouTube, sees all these great touchdowns. Got to have him. It's very easy to sell it as a marketing thing. When Russell Wilson went to Denver, we'd all seen Russell Wilson's final year in Seattle. The injury hit one. And we could just tell. I mean, this is not hindsight. It just didn't quite feel like the same player. And then when you're seeing Denver's fans acting like they signed Patrick Mahomes and that this was it, and he was going to be the thing that led them to numerous Super Bowls, it just didn't really chime. But I could easily imagine a team trading for DK and doing the same thing. Look what we've got. We have got DK Metcalf. How good is this? And the fan rushing out to get his jersey, and this is the move. A bit like when the Seahawks got Jimmy Graham. This is it. Wow, this is a game changer. This is going to get us over the top. Fantastic. And he ends up being an 800-yard receiver next season, scoring 5 touchdowns or whatever. And you think we've got the better end of that. I could definitely see that happening, the clamour happening. But I thought we'd hear more from now. I thought we'd hear several teams are interested. This is going to be a good market. And all we've had is Jordan Schultz saying, well, I think the Chargers were interested last time, a year ago, and it didn't go anywhere. So, well, that's all we've had. So we've got a ton of super chats. I want to get through those in a second and keep those coming in because we've got loads of those. I just wanted to... Curtis sent me the financial details that I think are worth reading out. So, because it is quite interesting. So Curtis told me that they've got $32.5 million in cap space, which is about 29 in effective cap space. Curtis said trading DK nets about 10 million more. It's 10.8 million more. And then Curtis said Nwosu's new deal, which when they restructure that, should net another 8 million. So you're talking about 40 million to spend at that point in terms of effective space. And Curtis was saying, there's a big war chest there. Oh, sorry, 50 million to spend in terms of a war chest. And then he mentioned that you also have the 2026 effect. They have $180 million to spend next year. And now that's not going to include like 30 million of DK Metcalf or whatever. He says it goes up to 187 million if DK goes, and if Nwosu isn't playing, on 18 million. So theoretically, they could have $200 million of cap space for 2026. And so that's quite an interesting picture. If it's 50 million via the Nwosu and the Metcalf, and you get a deal done with Geno Smith, that could go up to 60, 70 million. So you have a lot of money to spend there, Adam. And if they're going to go down that road, I have to imagine that they're going to spend that money next week. That this is not going to be a BJ Finney and Cedric Ogbuehi off-season. That they're going to go and get a Will Fries, a Drew Dolman, whoever, maybe dabble in a couple of other positions, and and go big here, because as you mentioned earlier, they always say they want to compete. Well, if you're going to lose DK Metcalf, you've got to get some proven talent into this team. And that's the opportunity is next week to do that. You can't just be relying on the draft. You can't just let DK go and say, right, we're going to add a bunch of young guys. That isn't going to take you to the next step. So I can only imagine that if they do this and they get a deal done, that they're going to be one of the big players in free agency next week. They've got the money for it.
You'd hope so. I mean, the last time they had, a large amount of cap room, they spent it on sort of 14 or 15 bums ultimately, didn't they? And they went for quantity over quality, which certainly ended up being a mistake. I mean,
Can I just say that? Have they had as much money as this, though, since 2011? Because in 2011, they signed Zach Miller and Sidney Rice and Robert Gallery. And that
was the year they signed
splash.
Luke Jokel? I'm sure that was the year they had a lot of money.
They had a decent amount. Yeah, they spent $7 million on him, and I think they brought in the big fat running back as well, whose name I can't remember. It was at Green Bay.
Eddie Lacy, that's it.
So yeah, I don't think that as much as this.
I think they spent about 50 million in free agency across a lot of players.
That was 2020. That was 2020, yes. And they did spend 50 million. You're right. That is correct.
And I remember Ben Baldwin had a chart of the players they signed and how much they cost in each position, and it was just an absolute who's who of cart horses.
I copied and pasted everything that they spent and about 17 articles after the season that finished after 2020, because it was just to highlight, here's how they spent their money. And you're absolutely right. It was a bunch of that was like the 3 offensive linemen instead of 1. Greg Olsen.
Yeah, Greg Olsen. That's one, not Luke Jokel. Or maybe it was Luke Jokel as well. But yeah, Greg Olsen for $7 million. A guy,
Kerry Hyder. Someone's mentioned it was people like that. I think Kerry Hyder was the year after actually, but it was Benson Mayowa and Bruce Irvin to fix the pass rush instead of Javian Clowney. It was stuff like that.
So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we don't have great previous of spending it particularly well. So all very nice. But it's funny you mentioned about the amount of money they've got available next year, which makes me think again, like you could so easily have given DK Metcalf loads of money next year and it not really touch the sides. That this does feel like perhaps the finances are just not, they've not wanted to spend the money on him. I don't know, because they can easily afford to keep DK Metcalf. Even at top wages, they can afford it. So something's not, it's just not right. I mean, look, I had a massive keyboard rant at you and Robbie today about them not signing Joe Tooney, who, having spoken to someone else, I didn't realize that the Bears GM used to work very closely at the Chiefs. So perhaps Tooney wasn't even really shocked. He was just like, I'm going to send you to my mate. And, the Seahawks may not have even known there was an availability. I don't know. But, that was the kind of player that, for a 4th round next year and $16 million this year. Like I've said to you in our chats before that I don't think Schneider has any benefit of the doubt left whereby he can be entitled to do, one of these clever free agencies where he, gets loads of players. Like, no, for me, his leash is way too short to allow that. I need to see some proven names. And someone said, Tooney's 32. That's fine. We're looking for someone for 2 or 3 years. I'd rather have a really good 32-year-old than a bang average 26-year-old. We've seen that with someone like Tomlinson and players like that have come in. Maybe he's not quite that young, but just young rubbish. I mean, who cares?
Luke Jokel.
Like, go and get me some proper names. If you want to act like a serious team, act like a serious team. And I just think there's only so many times you can go the clever route, especially when it's just not worked so many times recently. And look at the last year's free agency. Like, it was an unmitigated disaster. All their off-season moves were just awful. And I think if you've got that money, then go and get me, whoever you want. But get me 3 good players, not 8 potentials.
And I think that is what it comes down to. You're absolutely right that John Schneider has not got any money in the bank left in terms of patience. The Bears trading for Joe Tooney and Jonah Jackson in 1 week is the kind of thing that Seahawks fans have been hoping for. Not because it's definitely guaranteed to work, but because it's a plan that you can understand. if you were a Bears fan today, you can sit there and go, we needed interior offensive linemen. And we have signed 2 quality proven veterans who could put together a line next year that will be much improved. And you've still got the draft to come. And by all accounts, I won't be surprised if Drew Dorman ends up there. And they'll have looked like they've fixed their offensive line. Now, if it doesn't work out, no one will be able to turn around afterwards and go, Ryan Poles, you did not have a good enough plan. Because everybody, whether you're a Bears fan or a fan of the Packers, for God's sake, can look at that and go, fair play. That's a reasonable plan. That's a good, logical plan. The problem for the Seahawks is that they never seem to have a plan that makes any sense. Their plan last year was, okay, you've got Leonard Williams signed, fair enough. You've got your other bits and pieces done. What's left at guard? Like Lake and Tomlinson, that'll do. And then we'll go into the draft. We'll take a guard. You know, we'll bring in an undrafted center to. You've got Nick Harris and Oluwalu Timmy and the undrafted center, and then you get to the camp and you go, crap, this isn't good enough. We better go and get Connor Williams from his sick bed. He's not fully recovered yet, but we'll just get him out there. You rush him out there. He ends up having to retire halfway through the season because he's had enough. And it's a shambles. I think part of it was the coaching. I don't think the coaching of last year was that good, and the scheme and everything like that did not help. And that will probably be improved, definitely be improved this year with the people they've got in the building. But that was not a plan that made any sense whatsoever for the offensive line. And if they go into free agency next week and Will Fry re-signs the Colts or goes somewhere else, and if Drew Dorman goes to the Bears, and then all of the other linemen go, and then you're left sort of scrambling around doing another Gabe Jackson trade because, oh crap, everyone else has gone. And we're sat here looking in the middle of the month going, that line looks just as bad as it did last year. That won't be good enough. And when you've been in charge as long as John Schneider has, and the successes that he's had are a year further into history as we go along, you get to the point where you think maybe it's time for somebody else to have a go. And that's why we're now getting to that point. I think this is the critical offseason for him. I think if he can fix the offensive line, and we can all say, fair enough, that makes sense, understand what he's done there. If it doesn't work out, if it isn't a glorious line, if people get injured and can't play or whatever like that, then I think you give him the benefit of the doubt. But until he's actually put that plan in place like the Bears have done, there is no doubt to be given for John Schneider. Let's get through some super chats. There's a couple of other things I need to discuss, Anna, before we finish up. This from Silk Monkey. Before we talk DK, wanted to give a shout out to Tyler. What's your favorite Tyler memory? Cheers for all you do, Rob. Thank you, Silk Monkey. It's a good question, that. Obviously, the toe tap touchdown against the Rams will be fondly remembered. I want to say that he scored a long touchdown against the Vikings. We blew out the Vikings. It was the same season that I think we beat the Vikings in the playoffs with the Blair Walsh missed kick. I think we played them in the regular season and we battered them. And I seem to remember, I think Russell ran a long touchdown and it was called back. And then on the next play, they just threw it downfield, I think, to Tyler Lockett, and he scored a touchdown. So I think that was Tyler Lockett. There are so many great moments that aren't there, Adam, from Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, I mean, even in his first season, I think maybe against Chicago, he ran a kickoff or a punt back for a touchdown. And it just felt like at that point, there's someone, they've got someone here. I remember Doug Baldwin talked him up tremendously. I think Doug Baldwin might have implored the team to draft him, if I'm not mistaken, and had a bit of a victory lap when they actually did draft him. And yeah, I mean, look, he's been everything you could want from a representative of your team. And I suppose it's a bit of a shame that we can only give him 3 playoff wins in his 10-year career. I mean, you just feel like someone like that deserves more. And it's, I think it's a shame that today's bigger news, unfortunately, has probably overshadowed what should have been a really great celebratory day for him. I hope that's not any malice on the DK camp's part, but it is weird that they would leak this on a day like this, knowing how close he was with Tyler Lockett. I don't know if that's even worth a discussion or not. But look, it would have been great to have just done a stream about Tyler Lockett at some point. But alas.
Yeah, I'm looking. The team put out the 10 best moments of his. I can't believe that these are the only. I mean, like they've counted that one of the moments as he returns from a serious leg injury. And that was the thing is, you forgot he did have a very serious leg break early in his career, and to come back from that and have the career that he had is fantastic. And I've forgotten that they traded up to get him. He was one of those players who I think everybody who there's quite a few people that don't do it anymore who were talking about the draft at the time. Everybody was saying, "Oh, Tyler Lockett would be a good pick for Seattle," and then they traded up to get him. It was one of those ones where pretty much everybody had said he would be a good one for Seattle, and they went and got him. And a great Seahawk, and you do wonder. Jackson Smith and Jigba put a picture of him with his arm round Tyler Lockett, and the emoji was the fingers crossed. And I thought maybe he's suggesting he could come back. That maybe he'll check the market, and maybe Tyler Lockett would come back potentially, especially now that DK Metcalf has gone. They may go. That maybe there's a possibility of that. So we will see. Romeo says, "Can I get a dollop of Dolman and a basket of fries?" I would take an order of that next week. It's just you can't even begin to trust this team enough to think that they might get both, and it would be a tall order. Like to sign 2 of the top free agents would be extremely difficult. But do you know how to make that happen? It's called money, and you just throw it at them.
Difficult how? Difficult why?
Because there's a lot of teams who are going to be interested in them.
Sure, do it.
Yeah, well, I agree.
They have this thing where, who did they miss out on? They missed out on signing Jordan Brooks last year, apparently, because they sort of forgot that he existed whilst trying to sign Leonard Williams. Maybe just get some extra blokes in to do some deals if necessary. Just call them, make an offer.
I mean, I'd say to them both, the representatives, I'd say, whatever you're getting, come to us before you do a deal because we'll beat it. And if they ring you up and go, it's 20 million, and you go, "Oh, no thanks," so what? But even then, I'd be thinking, do you know what? Let's just go 21, whatever. I don't care.
Yeah, who cares?
No one is gonna have a go at the Seahawks for overpaying for these 2 players. And they might not be, Joe Tooney 5 years ago, and it might not be Trey Smith, but Fries is really good. He is really, really good, and Dolman's a top 5 center, so I don't think anybody would complain if they go and get those guys.
If the offensive line is bad next year, having spent a load of money on it, that will keep Schneider in a job much more likely than if they're bad, having not spent loads of money on it. If they're bad, having not spent money on the offensive line, there is going to be the uproar of all uproars.
Agreed. Slacker Hero says, "The Hawks stuck at a crossroads. DK not worth the money he wants, but if a team offered a first, a deal would have been done. Wonder if Seattle will settle for a 2. I think does he mean a between a second and a fifth?
Must do, yeah.
Or a 2 and a 5. I don't know. It might mean a 2 and a 5. But if it's a 2, let's say it was a 2 and a 5 or a 2 and a 4, my initial reaction would be, I'm really disappointed they've not been able to get a higher pick. And then I guarantee it would take an hour for me to move on from that, if that. Because I'd just be looking at the board and thinking, okay, right, they could do this, they can do that. And by the end of the day, you'd have convinced yourselves of a plan that could make that worthwhile.
Here's a thought experiment. Who's your favorite player in the draft that you would love to have?
Probably Tyler Booker.
Okay. So what pick would you need?
He might not be
plus 18 to get high enough to get Tyler Booker.
Yeah, I wouldn't trade up for Tyler Booker.
Okay.
I wouldn't. I'd only ever trade up, I think, for quarterback. I think.
But you've been given a free pick now, really, for DK because he's gone, right?
So you've got
pick 20, sake of argument. Are you going to be better off picking at 18 and 20 than just going? Yeah. I don't know. I know.
I think so. I think the problem with this draft is in the top 10, you're not going to feel like you're getting value. Okay. But I do think that, for example, at 18, I think you might just miss out on a collection of really good players that are going to go off the board before 18, and that'll be frustrating. But then you look at the next group of players and you think, do you know what? I can make an argument for him, and him, and I'm comfortable with that. And then when you get a little bit further down, you go, okay, again, there's a few who've gone off the board that you would have ideally had when let's say you're picking at like 24, 23, but at the same time, I could get him, and him. So there's actually, and I think that will go on all the way through until Seattle's picking round 2 at 50. There's just clumps of players that you think, yeah, I quite like them. and it's not necessarily at the positions that you want them to be at, but there are good players in this draft. There are good, solid football players to be had in this draft. I don't know if they're great players to be had in these positions that Seattle are picking, but there are good players. And I think having extra stock is going to be important because of the prospect of the quarterback. You can't keep going every year not taking one. And I think some years it's understandable. Last year they'd all gone before Seattle was on the board. 2022 was a crap class. Like 2023, with hindsight, the Seahawks were completely justified not taking one because they haven't missed on anybody in that draft. This draft, I think there's a good group of a few quarterbacks, not one, not two, a few who you could say, I could see them starting. And for that reason, I think they're worth considering. Corey says, hear me now, quote me later. Trading DK will make the Seahawks better in the long run. I hope you're right, Corey. Really hope you're right. Thank you for your super chat. Cisco says, with Lockett gone and likely DK now, the only high-profile remnants of the old regime is Geno. It sure feels like this is the actual start of the rebuild. I'm here for it. Thank you, Cisco. I really appreciate that super chat. And he might have a point there, Adam. This does kind of feel as if once Geno's gone and once DK has gone, and with Tyler having gone now, I mean, Jaron Reed's gone and come back, so I kind of see him as, I don't really associate him with the Carroll era. There are not that many left, are there? I mean, there's guys that were added during the last couple of years of Carroll, but this does feel like almost like a fresh start. It's like we're getting there. And I'm also interested to see what a free agency period looks like with Mike McDonald having his feet under the table and having maybe more say in who they go and sign.
Yeah, these are like really annoying weeks, aren't they? Because you're just so antsy to see what's going to happen. Yeah. Like you want to make these massive projections and declarations and only to look like a complete dickhead in a week's time. So it's such a tricky one to know how to pitch it.
There is some news, but it's not good news.
What's happened?
Well, Bob Condotta is reporting that Ernest, I don't know if he's reporting it or if he's just somebody else. He says Ernest Jones had off-season knee surgery, potentially delaying Seahawks deal.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's his story or I can't check it because the Seattle Times doesn't open for me in the UK. But I'm just that's interesting because that sounds as if, I mean, what do you do then? Do you sign somebody else? Do you just wait this out? I mean, that is. Did they not trust this? Is it going to be sort of? This is going to be a real pain in the arse now. This because he clearly had an impact on the defense, and now you're going to be sort of left wondering what happens. Is he coming back? Are you going to have to go and sign somebody else? Can the next player come in and do a job? Do you look to the draft? You know, you've spaffed a 4th round pick on a rental for him for 10 games. Is he now going to go off and do something else? Like it. This is why I was never a big fan of trading for. I'm never a fan of trading for rentals. Because it's. I mean, everyone was saying, well, the Leonard Williams trade worked out in the end. They could have signed him as a free agent anyway. They needn't have given up a 2nd round pick for him. Like it's just.
Also, like it'd be like, is it ACL surgery? I mean, is it MCL strain? I mean, can be quite PCL. Like these things can be very, very different, can't they?
Yeah.
If anyone's on social media, just put it in the chat if you see an actual story, because knee surgery could be, it could be a Pete Carroll cleanup, like he used to love saying. It could be anything, really, couldn't it?
Yeah, if someone can have a look, then at the Seattle Times for us, because okay, let's have a look at this. The knee surgery, which was to clean up an injury Jones dealt with throughout the season, was portrayed as not overly serious. Apparently, Florio is reporting too. He may just be quoting the Times. Just getting some stuff cleaned up. Okay, well, it doesn't sound too serious then, which is a good thing. But the delaying of the signing is a bit. But then I suppose it might put other teams off, and the Seahawks might just think he'll just come back to us at one point. But it's just better
that
to
always
know.
Works well.
Yeah. It's just better to have him healthy and signed, I think. But I suppose if it does mean you can save a bit of money, then fair enough. And maybe it's something we at least now we know not to spend too long keeping an eye out for that one. We can just keep an eye out for Geno Smith's contract and DK Metcalf's trade request now.
Does this stuff maybe impact on guarantees? Like if you sign a contract with an injury, would that maybe be a
probably so.
problem?
And they probably want to test it and everything, don't they?
Yeah.
I bet you can't do a proper medical when you've just had surgery. You probably need to see how the surgery settles. CFA says, hey guys, I appreciate all of your hard work. We just lost wide receiver 2. I think JSN is wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 3. Why extend Geno? By the way, is it possible Mayer and the 2026 first round pick for DK? I don't know. I don't think the Raiders will be trading a first next year, because if they're bad again, then you're going to give away a top 10 pick. I think the Raiders would probably, if it is going to be the Raiders, would want to get rid of one of their seconds or thirds or something that they know is what they're giving away. Odium says, nothing really to say. Just want to say thanks for all the work. Odium, thank you. You're a big supporter of the channel and really appreciate that super chat. Kyle says, not much to add, but I just want to give you some appreciation and thanks for all the hard work you've been putting in the draft blog and here. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Kyle. Really appreciate
Amen to that.
Much appreciated. Noah says, I feel like the best hope for us is a 2026 first and a player pick this year. Position ourselves for a QB like Allah or Nussmeier next year. The only problem with that is there's already talk that Nussmeier is like, he would have been the first quarterback taken this year, which means he probably would have been the first overall pick. And if he has the kind of year that he's capable of next year, and if Allah continues to develop, you are going to, I mean, even having an extra pick, it's going to cost you a fortune to get up for those guys. Like, it's always hard to say, well, we'll just get the next great QB next year. I honestly don't know if either of those two players, by the way, are that much better than the quarterbacks in this draft. I like Garrett Nussmeier, and I think there's aspects of Drew Aller which are intriguing, but they're not miles. It's not like they're here and the rest of them are down here. I think it's more like this. So I'm not sure it's worth that personally. Lethal Land says DK Geno charms to Vegas for the 2025 second, third, and the 2026 first. That's very Madden, I have to say. There's a lot going on there, Lance. They don't tend to. You kind of see these wacky deals in the NHL. Like the Kraken did a crazy zany trade earlier, but this doesn't tend to happen in the NFL. We have 3 players for 4 picks. It just doesn't. It doesn't seem to happen in the league. Troy says, putting this out in the universe as a way to balance the cosmic scale, DK for 2 firsts and a third as a way to make up for he who shall not be named. Exactly. Maybe we're looking at this the wrong way, Adam. Maybe we should be expecting that kind of we should expect a Jamal Adams trade. Don't
forget a starting receiver alongside that. Don't do Bradley McDougall dirty in all this.
Throw him in. Throw a receiver in. That's it. I expect a Jamal Adams level trade. Like, where is the fool who is going to give us that offer? Let's have it. Will he step forward, please? And can
he's still in Seattle, annoyingly. Can we
do it by tomorrow, because I've got to drive to Plymouth on Friday, and I won't have any energy to write anything after that. Nick says, for years we've said that Seattle needs to swing for the fences more. Middling doesn't cut it. DK forced their hand. A transformational offseason awaits. I can remember going on your podcast, Adam, in, I think it was 2020. And I remember saying, I don't know why these things stick in my memory. I remember saying, I know they're going to do something next week, and it's going to be really interesting because they're never boring. And they will always come up with ideas. They are going to do something in free agency next week, and I just can't wait to see what it was. And then free agency's happened, and 2 days later, they've done absolutely nothing. And I remember sort of at that point losing quite a lot of faith, and that was really the first time that I'd spoken quite negatively about the Seahawks and got absolutely hammered online for being negative. People were saying, "What's wrong with Benson Mayowa?" And what's wrong with Bruce Irvin? And he just, this is, I'm not reading you anymore. And there was all of that stuff, and that's when it all started. But it proved to be a fair take because they didn't do anything, and that's part of the problem. Is I want to believe that it's a transformational off season around the corner, but we've been here before, and it didn't happen.
You need to, like Barry Fry, metaphorically go and piss on all 4 corners of the pitch to lift the curse or something.
Well, I mean, if I was in Seattle,
That's not one for the American listeners.
No.
That Barry Fry
Yeah,
pissing
yeah.
and all. Go and look up Barry Fry, Birmingham, pissing in four corners of the pitch to lift the curse. You can thank me for your 5 minutes of fun.
I love the thought that a whole bunch of people in Seattle are now going to be Googling and YouTubing Barry Fry, who actually is a joy to be around, by the way. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Barry Fry a couple of times, and we've had him on our radio show, and he is as expected. He is quite funny. Hawks fan Matt Man says, if Seattle trades DK, do they have to immediately try getting another true number one receiver? Is one required in QBX system? No, is the answer. The Niners and the 49ers and the Saints. And if you think Gary Kubiak had Andre Johnson, but it wasn't entirely necessary that they have somebody like that. No, I don't think they need a true big number one. I think it's more about route running and sort of intelligence and savviness and being able to run the precise, crisp routes. Not saying that DK couldn't run routes. Don't want to feel the wrath of Hugh Millen. But it was more about the kind of routes, isn't it? And if you look at the receivers that have worked in San Francisco, they're all very good route runners, very precise. And that's why I think Ibuka could be an option for them if they trade DK. Because the character, I mean, he is exactly the player that they draft. His character, everything about him he's spot on. He's like a what's the right way of putting this? He's just he's sensationally mature for his age, and like got an old head on young shoulders. So I think they would potentially look at him, and people will kick off a little bit. I know there's one or two people who don't like him. I've done streams with. I think as a number two to Jackson Smith-Njigba, would actually be a really good pick. I think he'd be a production machine. He's not going to be a flashy DK player, but he'd be a production machine in this offense. So that's my take on that. Another one from Matt. Any potential DK suitors who might also have a guard or sense you'd be happy for us to get back as part of a trade? I mean, I'd love the Packers to chuck a Zach Tom. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I can't think of anything in that regard in terms of trades with linemen, and teams don't tend to give them away. But I'll have a think. And
could have done Joe Tooney.
There we go. Could have done.
World.
Mikkel Cam says, if we trade DK, the Geno extension is dumb. It shouldn't be done because I doubt he'll do miracles without Tyler and DK. We need to get rid of him if we are stripping off the offense. Rebuild mode. Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of addressed that. I think the point that I made to Adam earlier was, if you now get rid of Geno Smith and you say it's going to be a rebuild, that's how John Schneider gets fired next year if it ends up being a 4 or 5 win season. And I don't like being in this position, Adam, because I think when you have GMs and staff sort of acting to save jobs, you're never in the right place. I think you either need to be building something or you need to be contending. What you can't be doing is self-preservation. Self-preservation keeps you in the middle. I'm a bit worried the Seahawks are in that kind of mode already. But if they can have... My dream off-season is fix the O-line next week. Make a couple of interesting moves that you go, oh, yeah, good signing that. I think the safety market in particular have got some interesting free agents. Best player available draft, but you do draft a quarterback who you think, yeah, that could be the guy. That could be the guy. And you actually have a plan in place for 2026 where it might not be just Geno Smith rolled out again. I think that's important. If you can do that, I'll be somewhat content going into the summer. But long gone are the days, Adam, where you do feel as if the draft and the free agency is just a beautiful distraction from life. And then you just look forward to September. It does feel a little bit at the moment as if there's more hand-wringing and worry and sort of anxiety around the Seahawks than enjoyment and belief.
Yeah, and I was listening to Brian earlier talk about how there's so much room to be excited because it's such a potentially young team. My worry is that you're not a young team for very long in the NFL. And if anything, I think if you look at the age profile of a lot of the players that they've drafted in the last 2 to 3 years, you'd probably have circled like this year as the one to really have a go at when you've got a load of young talent that aren't earning a lot of money. But if you think about by the end of next season, the number of players on the current roster that will be coming to the end of their 3rd or 4th year, like there's a lot of turnaround that happens at that point. And, they didn't have a particularly great draft last year in terms of, filling the roster with loads of stars. So, you're Maffeys and Halls, who right now feel like really good players to have, in the team. They're just not going to be there because it's unlikely you're going to pay them, and you're going to have Witherspoon and JSN. They're going to be on, pick up their 5th round options, and Tariq Woolen may not be here. Kenneth Walker, like you don't stay young for long. And I remember talking about having like a sand timer going off. Or tipping over a sand timer a few years ago, saying that I think they're probably in a 3 or 4 year window now where this team, if it's going to win, needs to win now. They're sort of creeping towards the end of that, which does slightly alarm me, because I just feel like you blink and all of a sudden, JSN's going to be at the end of year 3, and if DK leaves this year, and they sort of accept that this isn't going to be one to go for, well, then everyone's a year older, and I don't know. I'm always wary when people talk about how young your team looks, because 17 games later, you're just not anymore.
Absolutely. And it's just tough. I mean, you need special players as well. And that's the other thing the Seahawks don't have. And I don't think you can parlay this into like a Myles Garrett trade, by the way. Like, firstly, Myles Garrett is very difficult to trade until after June the 1st. And you might have to wait on that one. And if you want to get Myles Garrett, I mean, I have to say this, no offense to Mike Salk, but if I have to hear one more time him suggest that you could get Myles Garrett for a 1st and a 3rd, I am going to lob my phone across the room. There is no way that you are going to get Myles Garrett for a 1st and a 3rd. Like, you can't do that. Whoever trades for Myles Garrett, it's going to be a mega deal. It's going to be a massive trade. It's going to be a couple of firsts, maybe a high second, well, not a high second, a second on top of that. Players, it's going to be a mega deal to get Myles Garrett. And I don't know why the Seahawks would be the ones to win that battle, or why he would necessarily pick them if he gets to choose where he goes. He probably will get traded at some point, but it's probably not going to be before the draft. But they don't have many stars at the minute, Adam. They just don't have the players that you want to pay to watch, that you see get drafted in fantasy drafts, or that people are going to get excited about, or be in the top 100. And how do they get more players like that? And also, we've been saying it for years, and I still believe this. I still think Geno Smith is a very viable bridge quarterback, but that's what he is. And I don't know if my brain can take another year of an argument, Adam, where you've got half the fan base saying he's actually the best thing since sliced bread and a top 8 quarterback or something silly. And then you have the other side of it constantly whinging every time he has a bad throw, saying he needs to be cut immediately. Like, this just, those two sides just bore the arse off me and make being a Seahawks fan less enjoyable.
Sorry. That, I think we all agreed that was by far our least favorite part of. I think actually that made us not enjoy last season on the whole, because it became such a permeating, boring, miserable argument that you'd come on a live stream, with thoughts on the game to talk about the game, and the comments just full of Geno one way or the other. And we've all got opinions on him, but I felt like most of us could have discussed Geno for 10 minutes per game and moved on, which is fair to talk about the quarterback of your team, most important player by far. How did he do? This, that, and the other. But it was just a referendum every week. It was just so miserable.
It sucks the life out of following this team.
100%.
And it's both sides. And the thing is that the negative ones who don't like Geno Smith often get the most ire, I think, because it's a negative position. And the positive ones are seen as like having a positive upbeat position, because but when you have people like, look, Mike said in there, Brian tweeted out, "You Geno haters can suck it" after one game. How's that helping anything? It's not. That doesn't help the situation whatsoever. And neither does it people coming on and just being wildly over the top in their praise of Geno, or acting like you're an idiot if you don't agree with them. Like, the whole thing is just wrong.
Both sides were toxic and divisive, and that's not an exaggeration, I don't think.
Yeah. Agreed. And I don't know. I don't think that changes while he's the quarterback. I don't think you get rid of a quarterback for that, by the way, because that's just preposterous. I mean, any GM who would get rid of Geno Smith because of the online discourse is not fit for purpose. But I'm ready to sort of see a plan for the future so that we can maybe have a different kind of conversation. But unless the quarterback who's drafted, like I can just see it now. If they drafted Quinn Ewers like I mocked yesterday, half the fan base are going to hate Quinn Ewers before he's even walked through the airport lounge in Seattle. They've just made their mind upon him. So I don't know. I guess we can't have nice things. Anyway, we've done an hour and 10. I think we're just about, we've done this. So Adam, really appreciate your time, pal. Always enjoy your thoughts. Good to have you on again. Big thank you to everybody who sent super chats in. Great live audience as well. Thank you for tuning in and watching. Do us a favor. Go to the video, like the video on YouTube. Make sure you just hit that little thumbs up. Give it a like. It helps the channel. Subscribe. Give us a subscription. And let's get those numbers up towards 10K before the draft. And one final favor, leave a comment in the comment section because it just helps promote the video to everybody else. So that'd be really helpful if you could do that too. Big thanks to Adam again. We'll be back soon. There's a lot going on. So check out SeahawksDraftBlog.com because if anything happens, we'll be reacting to it on there and on the channel as well. Until next time, bye for now.